Centuries have passed, decades have passed, and the United States is still dealing with the same issues. Racism is an ongoing problem in America and has not yet vanished. As we turn on the news or open up an article, we continue to see the hateful things going on in today's world. Many people of color are being targeted with racist words and physical violence. It is unfortunate to say that our government was a part of the segregation between the whites and blacks. Until finally one day, segregation was no longer allowed and people of color finally be treated as equal human beings. In the 1990s, students were being pulled out of their classroom, an environment they once knew, to somewhere they are unfamiliar with. In 1951, Barbara Jones led her fellow African American high school classmates in a walkout to protest the inequality of segregated schools. Many of my classmates have discussed the importance of fighting for what is right. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement. This movement is encouraging others to fight for what is right. As a Mexican American female, I myself have been harassed and bullied by others for being different. As for my fellow peers, we all come from different backgrounds, different life stories, and once in our life, we have all felt abused, either verbally or physically. As we continue to wander the streets, we continue to see and hear the awful things that people have to say to each other. We're the change we want to see in the world. Many people talk about a better tomorrow, but don't act to make things happen. I have gained my knowledge about the Barbara Jones walkout while in my U.S. history class, and by doing some research on websites followed with information on the Barbara Jones walkout. One website that I got reliable information on was a website called Milton Museum, which is the remembrance of Barbara Jones' life. A couple years ago in my U.S. history class, we had a lesson on segregation, and Barbara Jones' name was mentioned. We had learned that she had spent hours working on the fields as long as at the Reverend Vernon John store with her uncle, who was a civil rights leader at the moment. Barbara Jones was just a normal high school student like all of us were. She was an introverted girl that enjoyed learning. My teacher went on to say that she went on to become part of the 1994 Brown versus Board of Education case that sued in schools segregation. Barbara Jones took a stand against the unequal treatment of African American students in her county. Today I will be discussing the challenges that Barbara Jones had to face while leading the walkout, and then I will follow up with the outcome of the walkout and what it meant for the future. Now I want to spend a few minutes informing you of the everyday challenges that Barbara Jones had to face while leading the walkout. There are many obstacles that Barbara Jones had to face being an African American girl living in the 1950s. After the strike, Jones was being taunted and harassed by white supremacists. Sarah Wintersmith states in an article for the Capital Outlook website entitled A Heroine Honored Barbara Jones Day, written May 7, 2018, that after the strike, the Jones family was harassed and the KKK burned a cross in the yard of the family's home. Barbara Jones and her family were not seen the same. They were respected by many, but also envied by others. In the 1890s, life was not easy for people of color. Although the First Amendment allowed freedom of speech, it was not as easy to start a protest or a strike without getting shut down by the police. Jones was ready to put up a battle against the school boards and government officials until a change was made. In June 1959, the Prince Edward supervisors voted not to fund public schools any longer. Katie June Frenzen states in an article for the National Endowment for the Humanities website entitled Massive Resistance in the Small Towns, September 2013, that the school closing didn't just affect children's education, they changed families. Parents had decided whether to send their children away so they could continue school. Many children were not able to receive an education for years due to the shutdown of public schools. Although Jones no longer lived in Virginia, the children and students that still lived there had to decide whether to go to school or not. Therefore, many families had to face the challenge whether to send their children to schools or not, because there was only private schools available, so low-income families did not have the option of sending their children to these fancy schools. We discussed the challenges that Jones and her classmates faced. Now we will discuss the outcome of the strike. After the protests were done, Jones didn't stop there. She continued to fight until change was made. Emily Richmond states in an article for the Atlantic website entitled The Forgotten School and Brown vs. Board of Education, written May 16, 2014, that the subsequent lawsuit later became one of the 5 cases forwarded into the Brown vs. Board of Education case, the landmark desegregation decision by the U.S. Supreme Court that made separate but equal unlawful. Jones took part of what is now history. If she would have never taken a stand, who knows how long it would have taken for schools to become equal. Segregation was not only in schools but also in public places such as parks, restrooms, stores, and other places. After the Brown versus Board of Education case, many other cases related to school and racism started to appear more. People were no longer afraid to take a stand. In August 1998, the Mullen High School was designated into a museum for the Barbara Johns walkout. In an article from the Hampden-Sydney College website entitled "Remembering Barbara Johns," posted August 27, 2007, that the heart of the museum will be the stories of people who actually lived through the struggles of the 1950s and 60s. This exhibit will focus on the conditions of Mullen High School before 1951, the student strike, and the battle for school desegregation. This museum was a great outcome because it will allow people to come in and educate themselves on such a historic event in history. Although many unfortunate events had to happen for people to know Barbara John's name, she would never be forgotten as a great activist. As we come to the end of my speech, it is my hope that you have a better understanding of the challenges that Barbara Johns and her classmates had to face, as well as the outcomes. The strike that Johns led became very historic, and she would never be forgotten for her passionate ability to fight for what she believes in. Imagine being a 16-year-old female living in the 1950s and receiving the amount of backlash that she received. Barbara Johns proved how passionate she was about fighting for what she believed in. Although if she would have fought, who knows how long schools would have become equal. As we know, racism is still alive in today's world. We continue to see hateful and discriminative things in the TV. People still feel compelled to say these hateful things because of who is president now. As we continue to go to stores, parks, the malls, we continue to hear and see these awful things that people say to each other. This should no longer be acceptable. Today in the world, we are so segregated from each other. We are going back in time instead of moving forward as one. We should be loving our neighbor instead of hating each other. One person at a time, we can make a difference, and we can learn from Barbara John. We can follow her lead and make a difference in this world. My hope is that we soon become desegregated once again, and I hope that we can all learn something from Barbara John. Thank you.